Dad declared in front of 30 people, "You weren't important enough to be invited to your sister's wedding." He watched me break. Everyone stayed silent. I looked at each of them. Then I stood up, pulled out my phone, and said 10 words that wiped the smiles off every single face. My phone kept buzzing against the passenger seat like something trying to claw its way out of a box. I didn't look at it. I sat in the dark with the engine off, watching my mother's porch light flicker through a windshield that was starting to fog at the edges, and I thought about the envelope in my glove box. I'd known it was there all night. I'd felt it the whole drive over, the way you feel a splinter under a bandage. Not painful exactly, just present, just waiting. My attorney had overnighted it to me 6 days earlier, and I'd shoved it in the glove box instead of opening it, because some part of me still believed I wouldn't need it. Some part of me still thought if I just showed up, if I just kept being useful, kept being generous, kept being quiet, my father would eventually run out of reasons to erase me. 32 years old, and I was still doing math on how much love I had to buy to stay in a room. The phone buzzed again. I finally turned it over. Mom, 7 messages. Aunt Carol, 2. Brianna, 1. Did you seriously just do that at dinner? I didn't answer any of them. I opened the glove box instead, pulled out the envelope, and set it on my lap without opening it, my thumb running over my attorney's return address like it was a rosary. Lindqvist Law, LLC, 340 Grant Ave, Suite 210. Then I put the car in drive and went home. Because whatever I decided to do with what was in that envelope, I wasn't going to decide it in my mother's driveway with 30 people watching through the blinds. I run a small branding and event consulting agency out of a converted loft above a bakery in the short north, Larkspur Creative. 6 employees, a handful of retainer clients, and, because Columbus is smaller than it looks, half the wedding vendors in Franklin County on speed dial, because I'd designed their websites, their signage, their seating chart templates. That's the part nobody at that dinner table thought about when they used my business account to book a venue. To them, it was just Dana's discount. To me, it was my name on every line of every contract. That's how I ended up funding my own exile. It started 9 months before the wedding, with a phone call from my mother that began, the way it always does, with her voice pitched 2 notches too bright. "I hate to even ask," she said, "but Tyler's parents are stretched thin right now, and the deposit on the Aldridge estate is due Friday, and if we lose the date, we lose the whole spring." She didn't ask me for money. My mother never asks for money. She describes a crisis and waits for me to solve it, and I always do, because somewhere under 28 years of being the daughter who wasn't quite right, too intense, too independent, too much like a person, and not enough like a prop, I still believed that if I kept solving crises, eventually I'd be family instead of infrastructure. I told myself it was normal. Older sisters help. That's what older sisters do. I wired $8,000 to the Aldridge estate that Friday, using my business account because Renee Castillo, the venue's event manager, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who'd been running weddings there for 12 years, could process it same day if it came from an existing corporate account instead of a new personal one. It felt efficient. It felt helpful. It felt, for about 6 weeks, like maybe I was finally being let back in. Then it kept happening. Catering needed a deposit. My card. Alterations for Elise's dress ran over. My card. Kendra Voss, the planner. Sharp-eyed, expensive, worth every penny. Owner of Voss & Coer Events. Mentioned offhand that, since it's all under the Larkspur account anyway, it'd be simpler to route the florist through me too. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself this was just what modern families did. Split the costs. Whoever has the flexibility handles it. By March, I'd fronted almost $31,000 across 6 vendors, all of it under my name. All of it with a quiet understanding that Elise and Tyler would pay me back after the honeymoon, which is the kind of sentence that sounds like a plan and functions like a door closing softly enough that you don't hear the latch. My hands didn't shake yet. That came later. This part just felt like drowning slowly enough to mistake it for swimming. The first real red flag came in April, in the form of a text I wasn't supposed to see. Kendra had CC'd the wrong Pierce. She meant to email my mother the final family and close friends seating draft. She emailed me instead. Subject line still reading, Elise plus Tyler, family table layout, final V3. I opened it standing in my own kitchen at 9:14 on a Tuesday night, expecting to see my name near the front, maybe next to Aunt Carol, maybe near the cake table because I liked being useful even in seating charts. I wasn't on it. Not at the family table. Not at any table. Not on the guest list at all. I read it twice, certain it was a draft error, an outdated version, something Kendra would laugh about when I mentioned it. I told myself it was nothing. People get left off spreadsheets constantly. I build spreadsheets for a living. I know how a row disappears when someone fat fingers a delete key. I texted my mother, "Hey, weird thing, I don't think I'm on the seating chart Kendra sent. Probably just an old version, right?" She didn't respond for 6 hours. When she did, it was 4 words. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out is not the sentence you send someone who was accidentally left off a list. It's the sentence you send someone you're actively deciding whether to keep. I let it go. I told myself it wasn't worth a fight 3 months out from the wedding, that I'd rather absorb the sting quietly than be the sister who made things difficult again. A label I'd been wearing since my engagement ended 2 years earlier, and my father decided, without ever saying so directly, that a broken engagement was a character flaw rather than something that had simply happened to me. I kept paying vendors. I kept showing up to dress fittings I wasn't invited to sit through, standing in doorways with garment bags because someone had to carry things. I told myself proximity was the same as belonging. It wasn't. I tried to fix it the ordinary way first, the way I'd fixed everything else in that family for a decade, quietly, directly, without making anyone else's afternoon uncomfortable. I called my father myself, 2 weeks after the seating chart email, and asked him straight out whether there was a reason I wasn't on the guest list. He laughed. Actually laughed. A short dismissive bark I'd heard him use on customers who tried to negotiate prices at the store. "You're overthinking a spreadsheet," he said. "Nobody's keeping score." I asked if I could see the finalized list, just to confirm. He said he'd have your mother send it. She never did. I told myself that was an oversight too. The 4th or 5th thing that spring I'd filed under oversight instead of pattern, because pattern would have meant admitting something I wasn't ready to carry into a family dinner 3 months out. By May, I'd noticed I wasn't in the bridal party group chat anymore. I'd been quietly removed, not blocked, just gone, the way a name disappears from a thread without anyone announcing it. I told myself group chats get cleaned up. I told myself it didn't mean anything. My stomach knew before the rest of me did. I remember standing in my kitchen rereading that seating chart email a second time, a week later, and feeling something drop through the center of my chest like a dropped glass you hear break before you see it. I called my mother and asked her directly if something was going on. She told me I was reading into things. She told me Elise was stressed and that I should give her grace. I asked whether I was invited to my own sister's wedding, and my mother, Linda Pierce, 59 years old, married to my father for 34 of those years, a woman who has spent 3 decades managing his moods the way other people manage weather, said, "Of course you're invited, don't be dramatic," and then never sent me an invitation, not a save the date, not an RSVP card, nothing with my name on it, ever, in any form, while my name sat on 6 vendor contracts totaling, by the week of the dinner, $42,300. That's the part that still catches in my throat, if I let it. Not that they didn't want me there. People are allowed not to want you somewhere. What I can't get past is that they wanted my money in the room even after they decided they didn't want me in it. I had one more red flag before the dinner, and I want to be honest about this one, because it's the one I failed hardest at fixing. In early June, my attorney, Patricia Lindqvist, a business and contracts lawyer who'd represented Larkspur since I started the company, and who, 3 years earlier, had also drawn up a much bigger, much quieter piece of paperwork for my family, called to tell me my father had missed his 4th consecutive loan payment. I need to back up, because this is the part of the story nobody at that dinner table knew I was carrying, and it's the reason the glove box mattered more than the wedding ever did. 3 years before any of this, my father's hardware store, Pierce Hardware and Supply, a business he'd run since before I was born, the one piece of his identity he was proudest of, the thing he called the only thing I ever built myself, was 11 weeks from foreclosure. 2 big box stores had opened within 4 miles of him in 18 months. His bank turned him down for a bridge loan. He didn't tell my mother how bad it was until the collection notices started arriving weekly. He told Elise even less. He told me, I've always believed, only because I was the one with the money, and he had run out of other options. I loaned him $85,000. Patricia drew it up properly. A promissory note, 5-year term, modest interest, and because $85,000 is not a number you hand a person on a handshake even when that person is your father, a UCC-1 filing that put a lien on the business's equipment and inventory as collateral. It's boring paperwork. It's also the only thing standing between family helped him out, and he could lose everything a second time. And my father knew that, and it embarrassed him so badly that he made me promise never to tell my mother or my sister where the money had really come from. He told them he'd secured a private business loan through a contact from the Rotary Club. He let them believe he'd saved himself. I let him have that. I told myself it was a kindness. I understand now it was also the exact shape of everything else. Me, quietly holding up the parts of this family they were too proud to admit needed holding, and getting nothing in the seating chart for it. He'd paid on time for 2.5 years. Then this spring, the same spring he was watching his younger daughter's wedding balloon past 6 figures, the payment stopped. Patricia flagged it in March. I told her to hold off on a formal notice. I told myself it was a rough patch, that pushing him while he was footing a wedding would be cruel, that I'd rather eat the missed payments than be the daughter who sued her own father 3 months before Elise walked down an aisle. I told myself it was a rough patch, that pushing him while he was footing a wedding would be cruel, that I'd rather eat the missed payments than be the daughter who sued her own father 3 months before Elise walked down an aisle I apparently wasn't allowed to stand near. By the 4th missed payment, in June, Patricia stopped asking my permission to be worried and started insisting on it. "Dana," she said, in the particular tone lawyers use when they've stopped billing you as a professional courtesy, "I've drafted a notice of default. I'm not filing it. I'm sending it to you so it exists. So the clock is where you want it whenever you decide you want it there. But you need to understand, if he's not paying you, and he's spending like this on the wedding, one of two things is true. Either he genuinely doesn't have it and he's borrowing from somewhere else to cover the difference, or he has it and he's decided you're not a priority." I remember sitting in my car outside her office reading that notice for the first time, hands not shaking yet, just cold. I put it in my glove box instead of my desk because my desk felt like a place where I might have to look at it every day, and I wasn't ready to know which of Patricia's two options was true. I found out at dinner in front of 30 people in one sentence. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark doing the kind of arithmetic that has nothing to do with numbers, replaying every dismissed text, every "we'll figure it out," every dress fitting I stood outside of, until the arithmetic resolved into a single, very clean fact. I had spent 9 months being told, in 100 small ways, that I wasn't important enough to be in the room. My father had just said it in one sentence loud enough for 30 people to hear, and somewhere underneath the humiliation, an ugly, clarifying relief moved through me. The relief of finally having the thing confirmed instead of merely suspected. At 6:50 the next morning, I called Patricia Lindqvist before she'd finished her coffee. "File it," I said. "The notice of default, today." She was quiet for a second, not hesitating, just making sure. "You understand what this does. It's not a strongly worded letter, Dana. Once I send this, your father has 10 business days to cure the default, or I can begin enforcement on the collateral. Given the missed payments, given what you've told me about last night, I'd expect him to try to negotiate, refinance, or fight it. I need you steady for all three." "I've been steady for 9 months," I said. "I can manage 10 more days." She sent the notice by certified mail and email that afternoon. I also asked her, separately, to draft something smaller and colder, formal written confirmation, on Larkspur letterhead, that all outstanding wedding vendor accounts under my business's name were suspended indefinitely, effective immediately, with no further authorization for charges of any kind. I wasn't only protecting the money anymore. I was drawing a line so clean nobody in that family could later stand in a kitchen and claim they didn't understand where it was. By that afternoon, both Renee and Kendra had the written confirmation in hand, and both responded within the hour, which told me something about how these things usually go for them. Fast, practiced, unsurprised. Renee's reply was 2 lines. Account status updated to permanently canceled, deposits already paid non-refundable per contract, and a line I didn't expect. "For what it's worth, I hope you're doing okay." Kendra's was longer and more careful, the tone of someone who'd clearly had this exact conversation with other clients before, and knew better than to ask questions she didn't need answered. She confirmed she'd already begun notifying the remaining vendors, florist, caterer, day of coordinator, that the wedding was suspended indefinitely pending new payment authorization, and that she was legally required to inform the family the account holder of record, not the bride, controlled every remaining service. That line was the one that mattered. It meant nobody could quietly route around me through a different card or a different promise. My name was the only signature that unlocked anything, and I had just formally, permanently locked it. My mother called 4 times that morning. I let it go to voicemail 3 times and picked up on the 4th, mostly because I wanted to hear, in real time, what version of the story she'd built overnight. "You humiliated your father," she said before hello, "in front of everyone." "He humiliated me first," I said, "in front of everyone." I just responded in a language he understands. "This isn't about money, Dana. It's a little about money, Mom. I've put $42,000 into a wedding I'm not invited to. That's not a metaphor. That's a real number I can show you." There was a long pause, the particular silence of someone doing math they didn't want to do. "Your father said the venue would understand, that you'd calm down and reinstate everything once you'd had time to think. He can call Renee Castillo himself and ask her that," I said. "I already have. She's holding the account pending. Nothing moves without my signature." "You're being cruel." "I'm being accurate," I said. "Those aren't the same thing, even though everyone in that house last night acted like they were." I asked her directly whether she'd known I wasn't on the guest list before that dinner. The pause this time was longer, and I sat with it, because I'd learned that my mother's silences told the truth her sentences never did. "I knew," she finally said. "Your father felt it would be less confrontational if it just happened, if nobody made a formal announcement. So the plan was to let me find out by not receiving an invitation. And if I never noticed, great. And if I did notice, you'd all manage me until I stopped being upset about it." She didn't answer that. She didn't have to. I asked her one more question before I hung up, because I already suspected the answer, and I wanted to hear whether she'd lie about it directly. "Did you know he stopped paying me back for the store? What are you talking about? She said, and her confusion was real, which told me everything. My father had let her keep believing the Rotary Club story even now, even mid-collapse, because his pride outranked his wife's right to know the truth about their own finances. I told her to ask him. I didn't explain further. I wanted her to hear it from him. In his own kitchen, in his own voice, the way I'd had to hear about the wedding from him at his own table. The 10-day window Patricia had given my father did not go quietly. Day 2, Elise texted me for the first time in 6 weeks. Not an apology. Can we please talk before this destroys everything? As though the destroying had started with my phone call and not with a dinner table announcement or 9 months of silence. I called her anyway, because whatever damage had been done to us, she was still my sister, and some stubborn, tired part of me wanted to believe she hadn't fully known what she was standing next to. She hadn't, entirely. That's the part I want to be fair about. She told me, and I believed her, mostly because her voice cracked in a way that's hard to fake, that the seating chart, the group chat removal, all of it had been Dad's doing, executed through Mom, presented to Elise as, Dana's decided to keep her distance right now, it's better not to push her. She'd been told a story where I was the one withdrawing. She'd been handed my absence gift-wrapped as my choice, and you never once texted me directly to check, I said, in 9 months. She didn't have an answer for that, and I let the silence sit there because some things don't deserve to be smoothed over just because someone finally feels bad. She told me Tyler's parents had already started asking questions about vendor accounts going dark. She told me the wedding was 5 days away and nothing was confirmed anymore. The caterer, the florist, the venue, all of it in limbo because everything ran through an account I'd frozen. She asked quietly whether I'd reconsider. Just for the wedding, we can figure out the rest after. I've been figuring out the rest after for 9 months, Elise, I said. I'm done financing a version of this family that doesn't have room for me in it. Day 4, my Aunt Carol, my father's older sister, the one who'd nodded along at dinner like his cruelty was simply good parenting, called to tell me I was punishing an innocent bride for her father's mistakes, which might have moved me if I hadn't watched her nod in real time, while that same father told 30 people I wasn't worth a wedding invitation. I told her that innocent people generally don't let their fathers use them as a reason to erase someone, and that if she wanted to be angry at the person actually responsible, his number hadn't changed. She hung up on me. That was, I noted with something between grief and satisfaction, the first honest reaction anyone in that family had given me in months. Day 6, my father tried Patricia directly, attempting to negotiate the default down to a payment plan without involving me, as though I were an inconvenience to be routed around rather than the creditor. Patricia, 17 years into her practice, was polite and completely immovable. Mr. Pierce, I represent Dana. Any negotiation happens through her, or it happens in front of a judge. He hung up on her too. Day 7, my father tried something else. Something I only learned about because Howard Reyes, the CPA who handles Larkspur's books, and who'd also, at my request, reviewed the original loan paperwork 3 years earlier to make sure it was structured cleanly, called me with a tone I'd never heard from him before. Howard is careful. Howard does not call people on a Saturday unless something is wrong. I got a call this morning from a title company, he said. They were verifying business ownership on a piece of commercial equipment for a refinance application. Dana, your father is trying to move Pierce Hardware's major equipment and inventory value onto a new loan through a different lender, using Tyler's father's business as a co-signer. If that refinance clears before your lien is formally enforced, the new lender's claim could sit ahead of yours on that collateral. He's trying to get out from under the UCC filing before you can act on it. I sat very still in my kitchen holding the phone, feeling the floor tilt slightly the way it does right before you understand something is actually, finally, urgently real. How long do I have? I asked. Title company said the refinance is scheduled to close Monday morning, Howard said. Today's Saturday. I had, by every calculation Patricia and Howard could give me over an emergency call 20 minutes later, roughly 36 hours to file for enforcement of the lien and get a hold notice in front of the new lender before the refinance closed and buried my claim under someone else's paperwork. After that, my $85,000 and any leverage that came with it and would become a much longer, much uglier fight through a court system that doesn't move on anyone's emergency, but its own. My hands started shaking then, properly shaking, the kind where I had to set my coffee cup down twice before I trusted myself to lift it again. 36 hours. I remember doing the math in fragments, not sentences. Petition today. Judge's signature today. Sheriff Monday morning. Closing Monday morning too. 2 things racing toward the same finish line and only one of them could get there first. I stood in my kitchen with my phone in one hand and Patricia's number already dialing in the other, and for about 4 seconds I just stood there, not moving, feeling my own pulse in my ears louder than the ringback tone. I thought about calling my mother first, giving the family one more warning shot, one more chance to fix this on their own before I made it permanent and public and unrecallable. I thought about how many warnings I'd already given, quietly, for 9 months, and how every single one of them had been absorbed and ignored like static. There wasn't a version of this where I called ahead a 6th time, and it landed differently than the first 5. I called Patricia back. "What do you need from me?" I said, "to file today." "A signature on the enforcement petition and Franklin County Sheriff's Civil Division to serve formal notice of the lien claim at the business before Monday's closing, so the new lender's title search picks it up," she said. "I can have the petition ready in 2 hours. You need to decide right now whether you're doing this." I thought about the seating chart. I thought about, we'll figure it out. I thought about 30 silent faces watching my father erase me over dinner rolls and roasted chicken, and not one of them reaching for my hand under the table. "Do it," I said, "today." Patricia filed the emergency enforcement petition that afternoon. By 6 p.m., she'd secured an expedited order authorizing formal service of the lien notice at the business address, not the house, the store, where it would be recorded and visible the moment anyone searched the property. She arranged for the Franklin County Sheriff's Civil Division to serve it first thing Monday morning, hours ahead of the scheduled refinance closing, which would put my claim on record before the new lender's paperwork could bury it. I didn't sleep much that weekend either. I kept picturing my father behind that register, oblivious, still thinking he had until Monday afternoon to finish quietly rewriting the story of how he'd saved his own store a second time. Monday morning at 9:20, a Franklin County deputy named Dale Whitcomb, 11 years in the Civil Division, the kind of calm, unhurried presence that makes bad news feel almost procedural, walked into Pierce Hardware and Supply and asked to speak to Gordon Pierce. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. Patricia had warned me it would happen in front of whoever happened to be in the store, and my father apparently had chosen that particular morning to have my mother behind the counter helping him prep receipts for the refinance meeting. She was standing 3 feet away when Deputy Whitcomb handed my father a formal notice confirming an active lien claim against the business's equipment and inventory, filed by Dana R. Pierce in the amount of $81,400 in unpaid principal and interest, effective immediately, recorded with the county. My mother told me later, weeks later, once she was speaking to me again, in a voice that had lost the bright, managing edge I'd known my whole life, that she genuinely thought it was a mistake at first. That she said out loud in front of the deputy, "There must be some error. My husband's loan was through a rotary contact," and watched my father's face do something she'd never seen it do in 34 years of marriage. Go completely, entirely still. Like a man watching a door he'd spent 3 years nailing shut come open from the other side. The refinance closing, scheduled for 11 that morning, collapsed within the hour. No lender closes a loan on collateral that just picked up a competing claim, especially not with a sheriff's deputy's signature on the paperwork trail. Tyler's father, who'd agreed to co-sign as a favor to a man he apparently believed was simply going through a rough patch, pulled out entirely once his own attorney reviewed what had actually been happening. I didn't orchestrate that part. I didn't have to. Once the truth was recorded in a public county filing, it stopped needing my help to spread. That's the part that still sits strangely peaceful in my chest, even now. I never called a single reporter. I never posted anything. I didn't need to be cruel, because the truth, once it was finally allowed into daylight, did something crueler and more precise than I ever could have. It simply sat there, on the record, and let everyone read it themselves. A local business reporter found it that way. Marlene Ott, a staff writer for the Grove Heights Courier who'd been researching a feature on small hardware stores surviving against big box competition, pulled county commercial filings as part of her background research and noticed the lien enforcement dated that same week, attached to a business she'd already been planning to profile as a local success story. She called my father for comment. I know this only because Elise told me, days later, her voice flat with something that wasn't quite anger, and wasn't quite grief, that our father had refused to answer, hung up, and then sat at the kitchen table for 40 minutes without saying a word to anyone, which for a man who narrated every room he was ever in was its own kind of confession. Marlene ran the piece anyway, using the public record, careful and factual and utterly without malice, because facts didn't need help sounding damning. Pierce Hardware and Supply, long presented locally as a self-made survival story, is currently subject to an active creditor lien tied to a private family loan reportedly used to prevent closure 3 years ago. One sentence, printed in a free community paper that maybe 1,100 people actually read. It was enough. In a town where my father had spent 30 years building a reputation as the guy who did it all himself, the guy who never needed anyone's help, the story didn't need to go viral. It only needed to reach the rotary Rotary Club, the neighbors, the customers who'd shaken his hand at the counter for decades believing his bootstraps story. It reached all of them within a week. The wedding, which had already been unraveling for 6 days without vendors, formally collapsed the following Tuesday. Elise called to tell me herself, and for the first time since the seating chart, she didn't ask me to fix anything. She told me she and Tyler had decided to postpone indefinitely, not because of the money, she said, though obviously it was partly the money, but because I can't walk down an aisle my dad built out of lying to everyone who loves him, including me. I didn't gloat. I remember being surprised by how little satisfaction I felt in that particular moment, how much it just felt like watching something break that had already been cracked for years, finally giving way under its own weight instead of mine. My father tried twice to negotiate the lien down through a different attorney, framing it as a family misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand. Patricia's answer both times was the same: full repayment plan, court-supervised or formal foreclosure proceedings on the collateral. He chose the repayment plan. He is, as of this year, still making payments. On time now, monthly, automatically, because the county has a record, and pride doesn't survive contact with a court order the way it survives contact with a daughter who kept quiet to protect him. I want to tell you the family fell apart cleanly, that there was one dramatic confrontation and then peace. It wasn't like that. It was messier and slower and honestly more honest than anything that had happened at that dinner table. My mother called me 6 weeks later on a Thursday, and instead of managing me the way she'd managed every hard conversation of my adult life, she just cried on the phone for a while and then said, "I let him decide who mattered in this family for 30 years, and I never once asked myself what that cost you." I didn't forgive her on the spot. I told her I appreciated her saying it and that I needed more than one honest phone call before I trusted the shape of things again. She said that was fair. It was the first time in my life my mother had ever agreed that something I needed was reasonable without also explaining why it was inconvenient. I started seeing a therapist that same month, Dr. Naomi Fitch, a licensed clinical psychologist I'd actually first started sessions with 2 years earlier, after my engagement ended, then quietly stopped going once I convinced myself I'd processed enough. I went back the week after the sheriff served that notice, mostly because I realized I'd spent 9 months treating my own exhaustion as evidence that I was doing something wrong, instead of evidence that something was being done to me. Dr. Fitch's exact words in our second session back were the ones I keep coming back to even now. "You didn't fail to earn a place in that family. You succeeded at every single thing they asked of you, and the invitation still didn't come. That's not a lesson about your effort. That's information about them." Aunt Carol never called again. My cousin Brianna did, 3 months later, with an apology that was clumsy and late and, I think, real. She said she'd stayed quiet at dinner because confronting my father had never once in her life gone anywhere good, and that watching me stand up and make a phone call instead of a scene had actually changed how she thought about the whole family's silence, hers included. I don't know if we'll ever be close. I know I believed her. My father and I have spoken exactly twice since that dinner. The first time he tried to tell me I'd embarrassed the family over money that would have been paid back eventually. The second time, months later on the phone, he was quieter, smaller in a way I genuinely never heard from him before, and he said, "I didn't think you'd actually do it." I asked him which part, file the lien, or notice I wasn't invited. He didn't answer either. I've decided that not answering was, in its own way, the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. It's been 4 months now. Larkspur Creative signed its biggest client yet in September. Ironically, a regional hotel chain looking to overhaul their event and wedding services branding. A contract I landed partly because Renee Castillo, who'd watched the entire mess unfold from the Aldridge Estates side of things, gave me a reference that described me, in her words, as the most organized, most reliable account holder I have worked with in 12 years. Under circumstances I will not pretend were easy. Entire mess unfold from the Aldridge Estates side of things. Gave me a reference that described me, in her words, as the most organized, most reliable account holder I have worked with in 12 years. Under circumstances I will not pretend were easy. I keep that email saved. Some days it's the thing that gets me through the ones where I still catch myself flinching at a phone call from my mother's number. My father's store is still open. He's still paying on time every month into an account that legally, permanently, has my name on the paperwork attached to it, which means that for the rest of the loan term, whether he likes it or not, I am written into the one thing he always claimed he built entirely alone. I think about that sometimes, late at night, in a way that isn't quite triumph and isn't quite grief, but sits somewhere honest between the two. He spent 34 years teaching me exactly how small he thought I was. It took one sentence at a dinner table, one envelope in a glove box, and 10 business days for the paperwork to teach him something different. I was never unimportant. I was just the only one in that family who ever wrote anything down.